Hello, welcome to Workplace Wake Up. I'm Jen Shaw. Every week, I spend about 15 minutes covering legal developments, introducing you to interesting guests, and providing some entertainment to start your workday. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast today. With summer coming, I thought it would be helpful to talk about employing minors. Many of our clients like to hire minors. Sometimes it's the son or daughter of a client or an employee, or they want to have some sort of an internship program, or they just want to have an opportunity to get some kids in the door who have new ideas and new perspectives. We love hiring minors, but you got to be really careful. There are a lot of rules out there. So the first thing I want you to know is that the California Division of Labor Standards Enforcement, remember that's our sort of labor commissioner here in California, they have a pamphlet that is all about hiring minors, and it's called Child Labor Laws. It's available on their website at www.dir.ca.gov/DLSE. And it's a 2013 publication. So you might be thinking, gosh, haven't things changed? Not really. Not really. So a couple of things I want you to keep in mind when you're hiring minors. First of all is a practical thing. These folks are kids, right? By definition, they are children, they are young, they haven't had a lot of work experience most of the time. So you want to keep that in mind when you're communicating with them, when you're setting expectations. You need to have some patience in terms of explaining schedules, explaining responsibilities, really looking at what do you need to do as an employer to make sure that you are covering your bases and you are really providing an environment where they can succeed. Now, a couple of big things here about hiring minors. Any minor who is under the age of 18 is subject to California's child labor protections. So the way California defines a minor is somebody who's under the age of 18 and they're required to attend school, okay? So, and also any minor who's under the age of 6. So, and the reason, of course, that's important is they're not required to go to school yet most of the time if they're not eligible for kindergarten. What you need to understand is even if somebody has turned 18, I turned 18 in April of my senior year of high school, I was still subject to the requirements for hiring minors because I was still in school, all right? So there is a situation when you have an emancipated minor, someone who has gone to court to get their own independence. There is a process where they can get a work permit, for example, for working while they're under age of 18 without parents' consent. But the idea is there are all these rules, including work permits, that I want you to think about and be aware of before you hire someone. So when you're talking about a work permit, remember that the minor has to have the work permit in their possession before they start work. And there's what's called a permit to employ and work. So there's a form that the school has to fill out that will provide information about when the employee can work, what days of the week, what times, how many hours they can work the day before a school day, the day before a holiday. There are a lot of rules that deal with the hours worked for minors. There are also rules that deal with what equipment they can use. And this is a big deal for our retail clients. We have a lot of large retail clients. And there are machines that minors cannot use. For example, they shouldn't be around toaster ovens. So you have to be careful with them at something like a coffee shop. Balers and compactors when you're in a large retail store and you've got boxes that you are breaking down and recycling, or you're compacting trash. You have to be sure that the minors are not going to be involved in that process. You have to make sure keys are taken out of forklifts. They can't drive forklifts. So there are a number of different rules that apply to having a minor in the workplace. Now remember, don't forget, a minor is someone who's under age 18 and still has to go to school, okay? But even if they're 18 years of age or older, if they're still in school, there's still a work permit, okay? Now, one of the things to understand is that the schools are not always as expeditious in issuing these permits as you might like, the work permits. So you do want to really be communicating with the employee, the candidate, to make sure they understand, look, you've got to give me this permit before I can bring you to work. You also need to keep the permits on site. Why? Because the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement can come and visit your place of business anytime, and they will ask you if you're employing minors, and they will ask you to see work permits. So you want to keep those on site just the way you're going to keep the I-9s, the Form I-9s for immigration purposes. You want to keep those on site as well. Now, every year, the work permit has to be renewed. So it is important at the end of the summer, if you're going to have someone working with you during the school year, to make sure that that work permit is renewed. Now, there are some other things to think about with hiring minors. One of the things that we think is very important is remember that you've got a mandatory reporting requirement. If you have minors in the workplace and you suspect there may be abuse or something going on either at home or at work, you are a mandated reporter. So it's important. There is now a law in California that requires managers, supervisors, and others who will be working with minors to be trained on the mandatory reporting rules. We offer that training. You need to make sure that you get it and that your folks go through it, that you have a policy and procedure and you follow it. It's a very important responsibility when you hire minors. The other thing to think about is that minors' parents often get involved in what's going on. So you have to be prepared to get a phone call from a parent who says, well, I heard Johnny got written up the other day. I need to know what's going on. Or Johnny's going to be late to work today. Just wanted to give you some notice. Now, for some of our clients, it's annoying to have the parents involved, and I totally get it. There's this helicopter parent syndrome that we're all seeing, where I even have folks where parents of 30-year-olds have called to say, hey, I don't like what's going on at the office. When you're dealing with minors, you need to be a lot more patient about that because they're not adults. They don't have the ability to consent to certain things. They need their parents or their guardians' involvement in what's going on. So I think it's important for you to train managers and supervisors so they understand, look, there's nothing wrong with getting a call from a parent or guardian. Something might be on their mind that they need to talk about. And don't get too caught up in this idea of, well, the minor has a privacy right. Yes and no. When you're dealing with someone who is underage, who needs to be living at home or going to school you're in a situation where the parents are going to be involved, the guardians are going to be involved no matter what. So it's important to take a step back and think about, all right, what processes should I have in place to make sure that I've got that handled? All right. Now, I also just want you to think about the conduct in the workplace. Remember that a minor is going to be much less likely to come to you and tell you if they've been mistreated or if they've observed conduct that they think is inappropriate. So you really want to maintain that open dialogue with minors, make sure they know where to go, who to talk to, what to do when there might be an issue, when there might be a concern. And there are a number of ways you can do that, of course, just like you should with all of your employees, making sure that you let them know what the policies are, provide appropriate training, check in on a regular basis, just make sure that everything's going the way it should be. The other thing to talk to minors about is social media. There are a lot of issues that come up in the workplace because of social media, and minors tend to be a lot less sophisticated, not about how to use it. They're obviously way better than someone of my age, but about the implications. What does it mean that I sent a text to someone at home or I posted on Facebook when I was at home? They're an employee, but I wasn't working when I did it, so why does it matter? Minors can be even more confused about that issue than adults who have enough trouble in this area, right? Realizing what's the line between home and work. So if you go back to this document that the DLSE has provided to us, they talk about a lot of different issues. And one of them is penalties. The penalties can be very significant if you violate any of California's laws regarding the employment of minors. That includes pay. So for some of us, we're thinking, oh, I don't have to pay a minor. I'll just have them do an internship with me, because that'll be a great opportunity for them to work in a law firm or work in a printing factory or help in my boutique. You got to pay them minimum wage, right? There's no exception. If somebody is able to work, and of course there are different rules for different industries depending on how old they have to be to work. Generally, it's 15-year-olds, some 14-year-olds, depending on the industry. Generally, they can be younger in farming, but they still can't use that equipment, the equipment that can be inherently dangerous for them. But you want to think about this idea of they have to get minimum wage, they have to get rest breaks, they have to get meal periods. So you can't just bring somebody in as a favor to give them a little 2-week internship and think that that's going to comply with the law. Now, certainly, just like with anyone else who may want an internship or an externship with you, there are ways to give them school credit. So sometimes you can bring someone in under an organized and recognized internship program from their school where you don't have to pay them. It's a work experience opportunity. But that's a very formalized program. It's not something that you just informally come up with the parents, for example. So making sure that you comply with all of the employment laws is very important for minors, because the penalties are even worse if you don't do this correctly with minors. And there's an obvious reason for that. Minors are more vulnerable. They're less sophisticated when it comes to their rights. So the law looks to the employer to do the right thing, to make sure that the employer has taken the steps necessary to protect the minor, to make sure the minor has a work experience that is positive. Now, I started working when I was 15. I learned so much. I waited on tables. I worked at ice cream parlors. I sold cookies. I did all kinds of stuff. And I feel like I learned a lot about time management and customer service and communication. It was very good for me. It was hard sometimes because there were things that I didn't necessarily understand or appreciate because of my level of just time in the world, right? I just didn't know a lot. So I think if you're going to hire minors, you really want to think about being proactive. How are you going to create the positive environment? How are you going to make sure you're paying them correctly? How are you going to make sure people are treating them correctly? And for some folks, they've just decided they're not going to hire minors. They just won't do it. And there's nothing illegal about that. And that might surprise some of you to think if somebody's 40 years of age or older, they're protected against age discrimination. But there's no protection for younger people against age discrimination. So you might decide, I'm not going to hire anybody when they're in school. It's too much. I don't want to do a work permit. I don't want to worry about equipment. I don't want to worry about parents being involved. I just don't want to do it. I understand it, but I discourage that because I think it's such a great opportunity for kids who have the right maturity level and the right attitude to be able to come into work and learn and make a little money and really begin to appreciate having a work ethic and how to be successful employees. So I think it's a great opportunity we can give folks. Certainly a decision you need to make for your business, but if you do it, beware. There are a lot of pitfalls and a lot of issues you want to pay attention to. So as you're planning for your summer hiring needs, I'd like you to consider minors and make sure you do what you need to provide them a good experience and keep yourself out of trouble. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to spread the word, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and/or rate and review it. Of course, you can also follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, and email us at info@shawlawgroup.com.
Workplace Wake Up, including its guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction.